I also have a new staff to announce. I keep saying this. I'm still not used to the every other week staff breakfast, but Sean Ryan is. This is a time to announce him. Most of you have probably already interacted with him, but he's doing a great job as our director of long-term programming. All righty. Let me just get situated here. Okay, so the training today is person-served wellness practices and rights. This training is a training that is required by us from CARF organization. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about accreditation first, because I think that we hear a lot about CARF and SAMHSA and CCBH and some of these other things. Some of us hear about it more than others, and a lot of you, unless we're not directly involved in some of this stuff, especially the different layers of accreditation, we probably don't know too much about what these acronyms are. And acronyms are thrown around so much, letters and things like that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing that. I got to get used to the clicker here. So we'll start with that. So SAMHSA, first of all. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So they're basically the arm of the Health and Human Services Administration from our national federal organization. They're like the overall national organization that oversees all accreditation, standards, research, and development of substance abuse and mental health programs. So basically, they're the kind of the highest accreditation standards, and everything falls under that, and state levels also kind of fall under the SAMHSA accreditations. Now CARF International stands for Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities. CARF is kind of like the SAMHSA arm for accreditation. They're the ones that actually come out on site. We probably won't ever see a direct representative of SAMHSA or the federal government come out here to audit us other than the DEA, and that's kind of a little bit of a different caveat of audit, but the DEA does come out to audit our narcotic program and the distribution of our narcotics. But as for programming, clinical services, mainly it's SAMHSA that audits us. They also audit our narcotic program, but then they also go much deeper into auditing lots of other things, including some of the things that we're going to be talking about today that have to do with wellness practices and person rights, member rights. So one thing you want to think about when you're thinking about these organizations is that they oversee research and development of the programs, the work within substance abuse population. So CARF is an international organization, so CARF not only works with SAMHSA very closely and is basically the arm for SAMHSA, but they're also the same overseas for a lot of organizations worldwide. And so they are constantly collecting that data at the same time as they're out there auditing programs. They're also researching and understanding what is working out there across the world for what we do. So they're a really good organization that helps with research and development and current trends and things like that. Because as most of us know, what we do up here is very dynamic. It's changing, it's fluid. What works today may not work tomorrow. What works today is much different than what worked yesterday. And so we know that because we're kind of in the mix of it. We also know that this situation, this challenge crosses cultures. And sometimes it crosses cultures in a different way, and it shows itself a little bit differently when it crosses cultures. So with an organization like CARF International, they are also working across culturally in lots of different diverse populations and bringing that information together to try to help those that work in diverse populations, such as an organization as ours. So CARF is really, CARF is kind of to me a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because I believe in research. I believe in continually improving programming. because I've seen the benefits of that to help the people that we're helping. There's different ways to help people, and there's different ways to make connections and relationships and engage with people to get to that internal stuff to help that person make the right decisions. And so when you start to look at these types of organizations, they're not just coming in to hold us accountable, but that is a large part of the process, is that they're holding us accountable to our practices. They're holding us accountable to really intentionally focusing on wellness of our members that are here. They're holding us accountable to the rights of our members that are here. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in the busyness of everything else, in the busyness of updating a chapel or creating a sound system or new technology, or trying to figure out how to manage safety in our environment, because that's also a big one, is the safety here. We tend to lose some of these other core principles sometimes because we can only do so much. We're people. I always say that multitasking is a myth, and I've read a few books on that personally. If you believe in it, maybe I could be a decent multitasker, but I'm much better at focusing on one task and getting that done and then moving on to the next. And that's the way that I try to do it. And so when multiple tasks come to me, I have a priority list. And that's kind of what happens with all of us. And so then, organizations like SAMHSA and CARF come in and gently remind us, hey, look, these things are important, but if you want to keep our accreditation and if you want to continue to focus on doing what you're doing in an international level, these are kind of the things that you got to slide back up on the priority list, at least once or twice a year. So anyways, that's kind of what I feel. And so basically when you're thinking of these accreditation standards, you're thinking of accountability, but then you're also thinking of program improvement, overall program improvement and development. So let's get into it. Wellness. The definition of wellness is up there. This is Webster's definition. The quality or state of being in good health, especially as an actively sought goal. And that's kind of the part I'd like us to focus on when we're thinking about wellness. Wellness, before I've done this training, this is the second time that I've done this specific training, but I was thinking wellness kind of gets thrown around a lot. You see wellness center, you see wellness programs, health and wellness. What does that really mean? What is at its core is wellness? And I think the core piece here is actively sought, is the intentionality to wellness. We all want to be well, and we all want to, Daniel fast is in my family right now, and so that's the big thing that's going on right now. We're always trying to look for things to help us to stay healthy and active and have energy and be successful and have drive and generate drive. And so wellness kind of encompasses all of that. Wellness really has to do with a holistic component of a person, I guess, is really everything that helps them to be healthy or to be, in a positive state, to achieve goals, it's interesting. But the key here, again, is intentionality. And so how are we intentionally focusing on things? And here we're focusing on the members of our program. And in this training, I'm going to be focusing mainly on our license programs because a lot of the rhetoric and the verbiage here is geared towards the license type of programs, license types of environment. But this stuff can apply across our programs. We absolutely can and do use a lot of this stuff with our students. It's just sometimes can be shaped a little bit differently on how we do it in the short term versus the long term programming, and kind of what the point of the program is in that. And I'll get into that in a little bit later on when we're talking about practices. But wellness, lifestyle that promotes wellness. So when you start to really think about what wellness is, it also is attached again to the intentionality of the lifestyle that promotes wellness. So when we're thinking about lifestyle, we're thinking about what we're doing today in the here and now and in the moment, but we're also thinking about how can we help a person to replicate this and to make it consistent through time. that they can continue this progress, this wellness, this idea. And that's what we want to think when we're thinking about wellness, and how are we shaping the wellness of the members in our program? How are we helping them understand what wellness is for today and for the here and now? Because that is a big part of what we want to do, is try to help our members stay focused in today, but at the same time to develop skills and to develop different types of disciplines so that they can carry that ongoing. And that's, a challenge for myself also, that's constantly ongoing. And so 2 questions that I have here when we're thinking about wellness is, what challenges do our patients and students have in this area? And we could probably think a good number of them. Hygiene is a challenge a lot of times that our patients and students have in this area of wellness. And of course we can think of the basics like exercise and healthy eating, nutrition, things like that. What about relationships? Do we think about relationships when we think about wellness? Healthy relationships? We do a lot of things in the short term, like focusing on communication patterns and I statements and things like that, and how to keep the focus on, ourselves rather than pointing the focus to someone else. Communication, healthy relationships. Families, family patterns, family roles can be considered into wellness. So there are a lot of things, but initially we want to try to focus on what are the items that are glaring, and then work our way through that. And our programs kind of organically are designed to do that through the stages of change and through the stages of development, from like detox, short-term, long-term, intern, and then even ongoing aftercare with Naaman and such. And then, as we think about their challenges, we'll think about the next question, then how can we step into their lives to help them learn about wellness? I could probably talk about wellness all day long, as with each one of these sections, but I will spare everybody and move on to the next section. The next section is my favorite section, and this is kind of what drives me and has driven me as a counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been in the field counseling for a good number of years. And the practices of what we do, the actual mechanics, I talk about the mechanics a lot of what we do. I feel like I, a lot of times, am a mechanic or an engineer of practices to create the systems and design the systems to do the things that we want to do, to implement the care for people. That's something that drives me, is the mechanics of the counseling. When I was in school, it was something that kind of picked up early on for me, and I saw that. I was able to see that in the founding fathers of psychology, and also the mechanics of the teachings of Jesus. There are a lot of approaches that he uses, that in and of itself aren't the core of the message. The core of the message is the relationship, of God and Jesus coming into us. But there are different methods, the parables and the things like that. There's mechanics that are also there. And if we can learn that, I believe that our practices get better. The same thing in psychology and in counseling. There are a lot of great theorists that study birth order and human development, that study, if there are any meanings that we can derive from dreams, dream analogy, things like that, that just study behavioral modification. At its core is what we're trying to do. And I had this conversation with Peter the other day. Peter is our new outreach coordinator or outreach marketing guy, and he comes from Naaman. And we were talking about, this type of stuff. And I was saying, Jesus, in my mind, was the great behavioral modification master, because that's what really is what is coming about, is we're trying to change our negative behaviors to positive behaviors because it produces outcomes. It produces positive outcomes, and we all kind of know that. And so, in a sense, that's what we're trying to do with the practices, and we're trying to start to develop that idea and theory with a person right from the minute they walk on campus. So, just to break it down in a nutshell, practices for what I'm going to discuss today include program schedule, and our programming, just, the schedule is the foundation framework of the program, of what we're doing up there. And we also spend a lot of energy and effort in making sure that the schedule is creating the structure of the program that we want. Right now, there's a lot of emphasis on the long-term schedule, and there's going to be an overhaul, so to speak, of the long-term schedule. That has happened a few times since I've been here. Short-term schedule, we've definitely made some changes throughout the time, and it's always, again, kind of through research and development, and from also always trying to get better at doing what we do, and looking for new ways. So this type of stuff should have a level of fluidity built into it. Understanding that we're not going to just develop a schedule. We're not going to say, okay, for the next 3 years, I'm going to develop this bulletproof schedule, and this is going to be the schedule that we hold to for the next 20 years. That is flawed thinking, I feel. And really, it should be developed as in this schedule is going to change. Hopefully, we get 6 months out of it, even if I worked on it for the past 6 months, which sometimes can be a little frustrating. But the idea, if you have that idea and that mentality when you're going into some of this type of stuff, you're going to develop a better program, because that's just the nature of what we do and what we deal with. So program schedule, counseling techniques is another big one for the practices of what we do, is what are our techniques, what is our methodology. And so that is really thought of when going into practices in the things that we do. And then levels of care, and we'll talk a little bit about that. As a person organically progresses through change and transformation, there are certain stages that a person goes through. And a lot of us see that, a lot of us know that. But sometimes we are very familiar with the stage that we operate in. We are representative of a lot of different departments here this morning, and that represents a lot of different stages of development and change. And so I want to kind of broaden that here, and I feel like this is a good opportunity, and that's basically why part of this training is here, is to bring us all together and help us educate on the stages that maybe we don't work in, the other stages of change that a person works in, from the call center to naming center, and vice versa, every step through the way, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So schedule, program schedule. A lot of us are, I don't know if it's, and now I'm messing. Are you guys changing it? There you go. So, program schedule. As you're thinking about the stages of development, you want to think about, as a person enters our program, the level of programming needs to be the highest, so to speak. Structured, intensive programming is basically the highest. At least every 4 hours in detox, our patients are required to be somewhere, like, specifically every 4 hours, usually less than that. So for the first 5 days, and they're, it's in the nurse's station, and they're doing assessments. They're doing, and that I guess, we're all somewhere sometime. But I guess it's the intentionality of the way that we design the program. There's flexibility that grows through the stages of change and through the personal development, from intensive therapeutic interventions to life skills and self-care development, so to speak, like job trainings and things like that, in intention to help a person gradually be self-sustained and hopefully a healthy, well person. And so the most intense part of it is when they first come here in detox. And then so the scheduling around that is the most intense scheduling for the person. And then as they step into short term, it's one level down, although it's fairly intense. They're in something as much of the day as we possibly can get them in something, because the more that we develop the programming for that day and the structured programming, the less time they have to ruminate and get in with their own programming that they kind of had and they brought coming in here. And so that's kind of the battle, the internal-external conflict that's going on. And the programming is designed to help a person go through that internal-external conflict and start to develop motivation, and start to develop motivation in an internal way rather than an external way. Everybody comes in here, everybody, with some level of external motivation. Mostly it's very high. And external motivation means if you don't go to treatment, you're going to jail. If you don't go to treatment, you're going to live on the streets. If you don't go to treatment, you're going to lose your job. If you don't go to treatment, you're gonna die, you know? External motivation. Internal motivation is kind of harder to describe, but the way that I've described it over the number of years is it taking all of those factors and combining them, and then realizing that they're true inside. For me, that's kind of what happened. You know, I'm in long-term recovery. I'm a graduate of Teen Challenge. I was also on the run for many, many years, 12 to be exact. And I have had a lot of good people up until the point that I came into Teen Challenge. But when I got here, part of what God helped me realize is I wasn't just trying to fight the man. I wasn't just me against the probation officer. And if I could just somehow convince that probation officer or do something just to make them happy, everything else would fall in line. And then I realized it wasn't just my boss, you know, at work, who was like, man, why is he on me because I'm late all the time? I'm the hardest worker when I'm there. These guys are sitting around drinking coffee all day. Okay, I'm a couple minutes late, and I haven't slept for days. But if he could just get off my back, my family would come in line, my probation officer would come in line, I'd have money, I would be successful, I'd buy a house, a car, a family, woohoo, right? And then it's my mom, you know? And you go back and forth, and you guys know this. So the combination of taking all of that and crunching it together develops internal drive. When you start to, that aha moment that some of us hear about, is all of a sudden, it isn't just this person, that person, this person. It's everything in my entire life. And you know what it is? It's the drugs and alcohol. That's the aha moment. And we kind of chuckle when we see that. We're like, you know, you're really onto something. So that's the process that happens here most of the times. There's a methodology called stages of change that I won't really get into it right now. But very basic and brief. It starts with pre-contemplative, contemplative, then like determination. And then I'm kind of messing it up a little bit. I hear a couple over there. I could probably say it a little bit more. Preparation, action is one of them, right? And maintenance. And then it's relapse and back into the cycle. But that process happens usually here in our programs, and usually they come in pre-contemplative. If there is a pre-contemplative, some of our guys come in that way, you know? And then what we're trying to do is to help that external stage get to the next one. And it's almost like an assembly line with our programs, and the way that we're designed our programs is really, that's really in the nutshell of what we're trying to do. And so lately I've been having some conversations with some of us, saying that things like, you know, this person has a cultural mindset that is anti-treatment. And so for that reason, we cannot get them into short-term. They're just coming in and they're not going to budge. I recently just had the same conversation of short-term to long-term. These guys are just not, they're coming in here and they're just saying, I'm only here for this. I'm not here for long-term. And so what I would say, and what I have said, is that is, I completely agree. And that is why they're here. So that we can help them and bring out their rational mind, so to speak, to change their mind, you know, to make different decisions. Because you and I know very well what happens when someone comes for 3 days and goes back out. You know that. We know that. We see it every day. We know what happens if someone comes for a week and goes back out there. 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I could go on, and I mean, it obviously happens as long as you're in a modality of recovery. It could happen. We're all susceptible to it. I'm 15 years in, and I'm absolutely still susceptible to relapse, for sure. And of course, I rely on something much greater than a program, specifically, but it's developed through the years. I didn't start that way, you know, and every year, every day, I'm constantly working on that relationship. But it starts with what we do in detox. We are the representations. You guys are the people that are taking that stuff and understanding, yeah, this is what they're saying. But we understand that if they don't go through those programs, we see the statistics. Chris mentions them a lot. That's the reality. So it's our jobs as agents of change to continually look for creative ways to help a person remain in our program, remain in the modality, you know? And I'm absolutely biased to our program. I mean, you know, I have a lot to developing it, so I would be biased, right? But I am biased because of the people that are here, you know, because of you guys. And I've worked in 3 other programs, and I've worked with a lot of other programs, non-directly, indirectly. And I love what I do here, and I love the people that I work with, and I love our mindset and our method and our mission. Because even though we have lots of similar programming schedules and things like that, we also have things that are much, much different. So a lot of you know the schedule. The schedule's up there if you want to see it. It's in the academic hallway. Both long-term, short-term schedules are up there. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scene on all of our program schedules. And so when you get a chance, I would say take a look at it up there. The other part of practices is our theories and techniques, especially in the most intensive therapeutic modalities, which are in the beginning. We spend a lot of time on theories and techniques. And so they spend a lot of time in group session. And so what are they doing in these groups? Is it like, hey, I'm going to, you know, talk about and complain all day long, and then, you know, we get around a fire and say kumbaya, and we're all good and come out of that group session? Not at all. There is a ton of research that goes into the group theories that we use here. And we've chosen 2, basically, theories that we use, among others, that we're constantly encouraging through supervision to develop evidence-based practices. And evidence-based practices is just that. The evidence demonstrates that it works. Out of hundreds and thousands of people that are in programs like this, that are doing the things like we're doing, the research is all compiled together, and organizations like CARF take this research and say, hey, look, you know, this traditional CBT thing, it's not really working anymore. You know, we're seeing that people aren't really adhering to it anymore. But we're finding that, you know, if you add this, and this component to it, it's showing to be really effective. And then they've created the second and third wave CBT, which is the second wave is DBT. And that's kind of what we use. And I like DBT personally for one reason, because there is a component in it that is very spiritual. And that is much different than traditional CBT. And we can adapt that a little bit. You know, and as a counselor, I've learned throughout the years that we also have our own styles, we have our own adaptations to what we do. You could take the theory, but even in school, I learned that most purists don't get the outcomes that they're looking for. Now, if you're a pure psychoanalytic Freudian guy, you know, maybe in 15 years of sitting on the couch every single day, you might see some benefit from that. But in our culture, it just doesn't work. That doesn't work. And so that's how some of these theories have evolved, is we really want to see outcomes. We want to do something that works. We don't want to be wasting our time. And so our theories that we've chosen here are some of the highest evidence-based outcomes that are out there internationally. And so there are basically 2 of them. One is the process group that a lot of you guys hear. It's actually called the Yalom process group. And Irvin Yalom designed it, something that I studied in my master's program. And I have a book, if you want to talk about it, I'd love to talk about it. It's like that thick, and I read every 300 page of it, because I am fanatic when it comes to this stuff, and Chris can attest to that. I love this stuff. But Irvin Yalom process group, and it basically holds to 12 tenets. And these are the 12 tenets right here. Altruism, helping and supporting others, instillation of hope, interconnected, guidance, imparting information, teaching about the problem, developing social skills, interpersonal learning, cohesion, catharsis, external existential factors, life and death, you know. I mean, if we, you know, existentialism, you know, in and of itself seems to be very dangerous against our faith, right? But if we can instill in the very early on that, you know what, death is very real. Because as a person that is abusing substances, and as personally, I had no concept of death. And I overdosed. I died, you know. And not only did I do that, my lifestyle, you know, I did a lot of other things, car accidents, you know, I had crazy fast, I'm from Maine, had crazy fast four-wheelers. I took lots of risks. It had no concept of death. So in a nutshell, existentialism is saying, hey, look, let's talk about what happens after you die. What happens to your family? What happens to your daughter? What happens to your son? Because those are the types of conversations. And if we can get them talking about that in the very early on, eventually it's going to lead to, all right, then what's next? Well, what's next? You tell me. We have this chapel service going on over there. Maybe you could find what's next in there. That type of stuff. So existentialism. So all of these 12 factors are basically what our core process group is. And they try to do it together. So the idea, too, is to pull the counselor out, the facilitator out of the group, and have the group to communicate with each other. The facilitator is trying to communicate, trying to put the core structure into the group, and then let the group run itself. That is ideally the goal. And these guys know how difficult that can be, especially with the time-limited services that we have. Because a lot of times you have members coming in and out of group. And it takes time to kind of establish that process a little bit. So, but it can happen. And the better we get skilled at that, the better you'll see the adherence or the alignment of what we're trying to do. And people will also start engaging. You'll see the eyes go from down to up, You'll start to get questions. Hey, what is this installation of hope thing that you're talking about? Instead of I owe this guy money out there that I've been talking about for the past 5 days, all of a sudden, one day they're going to come in and say, I want to know a little bit more about installation of hope. That's what this stuff is designed to do. The next one is dialectical behavioral therapy. As I said, it's a derivative of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a directive type of approach where Yalom group process is a person-centered or a client-centered type of approach. DBT is more directive. It's more teaching skills. It's kind of more of a monologue in a lecture type of format than a group process. And it follows 4 tenets in dialectical behavioral therapy: mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, and emotional regulation. And really all it's doing is teaching a person some skills that they could take with them to help them with those 4 areas. And try to memorize, there's acronyms that you can memorize, things that make it easy to remember these skills. And when you think about it, mindfulness really, a lot of people, I've had a lot of conversations about mindfulness and that it's Eastern religion. And most of those people haven't taught mindfulness for years and years and years. Or if they have, they've only taught one type of it. Mindfulness, and you can, again, as a counselor, you can take things differently and kind of make them your own, so to speak. Or the more you learn something, the more you learn how to adapt it, because there's always adaptations. To me, mindfulness is just keeping a person here and now, in the moment. And that's the hardest thing sometimes, especially in detox. And, it happens throughout the program. Even in long term. It's like they're constantly thinking about what's going on out there or what I did in my past. If we could just keep them grounded in today. Hey, look, I get that, but let's work on this today. What can you do today? That's mindfulness. It's taking hold captive, right, of your thoughts and bringing them somewhere at first. And then we can develop that, right, as we go along. As they go from program to program to program, we can say, hey, you remember that mindfulness thing you learned in short term? Well, let's talk a little bit about it. And it's going to be talked a little bit about in a different way in chapel tonight, Now, there are other practices that we encourage in mindfulness, like prayer. Prayer is encouraged in mindfulness. It's an international evidence-based, it's in the curriculum. It doesn't say what or who you have to pray to. It just says prayer. It says different things like that in mindfulness. Now, of course, there's the others, distress tolerance, tolerating distressful situations. Is there any distressful situations up here? We need some of this training, right? So yes, distress. They need to tolerate distress. They need to be able to learn how to mitigate stress and crisis. And so that's what distress tolerance is. Emotional regulation. Man, this stuff, Again, I geek out about it. But up and down. Do we ever see anybody that's 1 minute screaming, next minute, kumbaya, this is great, I love this place. Emotional regulation. Again, I could absolutely do a week on that type of stuff. So I will keep on. Levels of care, I talked about that. So we can pass through that and go to our last section here. Now, if I had to say what is the most important section, this would be the section of the three that I'm talking about this morning. Again, it's wellness, it's practices, and it's patient rights or member rights, to all of our program, patients, students. We adhere to a high level of best practices in our long-term program. And that can be tricky because long-term program isn't licensed, right? So we have to decide sometimes what we're going to do. And we've decided as a leadership to uphold it to the highest level of best practices, which is usually the same across all programs. And that's what we do. And so this applies to everybody. And so this actually was just updated probably when CCBH came out. We updated this recently. I looked at it because I had an older one. And so this is probably one of the most living auditing documents there is it's constantly updating. And it's a little bit challenging for us as a faith-based organization. This is the area of patient rights. There's a couple of these that we are kind of navigating, and it's a little bit tricky for us to keep our identity. But we are absolutely going to keep trusting, and we're not going to change the way we're doing things, and so we're going to figure it out, and we can. There are a lot of different ways to be able to figure that out. So, but let's look through some of these. So this is every person coming into this program receives one of these and signs it. And again, the reason for this is to protect the rights of those coming into our program. Those coming into our program are by far the most vulnerable people here at this facility. And we have to remember that they are vulnerable. Even when they're in our face, giving us the finger. Sorry to be a little graphic, but some of us know a little bit more than others, that happens from time to time up here. They're vulnerable. In that moment, they're still vulnerable. There's still a power differential going on. And so a lot of these things are built into that to help us remember that, because it's hard to remember that. I don't remember that a lot of times. A lot of times I want to reach over and say, "What did you say?" I will love on you in the name of Jesus. But we got to remember that. And so part of this is that type of stuff. So they also, it's okay. They're also given this. It's part of they have to be giving this. They have to understand that this is a part of what we do. And we have to communicate this a number of times to them. And so that's a part of the regulations. So quickly, I'm going to read through them. First, it states, please be advised that as a person receiving treatment under certain section of Pennsylvania Drug and Alcohol Control Act, that the following rights and liberties, please read, understand the following information concerning your rights and liberties. So everyone is asked to read this that comes into the program. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect throughout your entire stay at PAATC. You may not be deprived of a civil right solely by the reason of treatment. You have the right to be free from abuse, retaliation, humiliation, neglect, and all manner of exploitation. The right to privacy and confidentiality related to all aspects of care, including but not limited to the unwarranted disclosure of medical records, whole or in part, and we have a whole training just on that one right in itself, confidentiality. So a lot of these are broken down into much deeper laws and rights. You may not be discriminated against on the basis of age, race, creed, sex, ethnicity, color, national origin, marital status, handicap, or religion. You may have the right to file a grievance if any of your rights are violated or if you have been discriminated against. Grievance forms are included in the handbook and can be turned in to any staff. So we do have a grievance policy. This is something Heather is very familiar with. Next slide. You have the right to an investigation and resolution of alleged infringements of rights. You have the right to inspect your own records. To do so, you must make a written request to your counselor, asking permission to inspect your records. Please be advised that The program director may temporarily remove portions of your record prior to your inspection if he determines that the information may be detrimental to you. The clinical supervisor will schedule a time for you to review your record. Records will be reviewed in the presence of a counselor or clinical supervisor. You have the right to request the correction of inaccurate, irrelevant, outdated, or incomplete information from your record. You have the right to submit rebuttal or memorandum to your own record. You have the right to participate in the development of your individual service plan, to participate in all decision-making regarding your mental health and substance abuse care, to be involved in discharge or aftercare planning. You have the right to receive information in a timely manner that can help make decisions regarding treatment. You have the right to appeal a decision limiting to access to your records to the program director. Your appeal shall be made in writing to the program director. You have the right to refuse to participate partially or fully in treatment or therapeutic activities unless participation is ordered by the court. Now this is a little caveat, and this is kind of sometimes a little challenging for us up there, especially in short term, but remember that second part, ordered by the court. Probation is a gray area in that also. And so when probation is a part of treatment, that they a lot of times can trump whether or not they're participating in treatment or not. But that's a tricky one. You have the right to give informed consent, refusal, or another expression of choice regarding service delivery, release of information, concurrent services, composition of the service delivery team, and involvement in research projects, if applicable. So this is kind of like the whole consent thing that we have to deal with. You know, whether or not there's informed consent, whether consent was released or not, or revoked. You know, that's a very challenging thing too. You have the right, when participation in research, to have adherence to research guidelines and ethics, if applicable. You have the right to request in writing reconsideration of a decision to terminate your treatment to the program director. Have a great day.